Welcome to Tech Photo Blog. This is episode number 28. I'm pretty excited about this episode because I'm finally announcing that the Camera Axe version 5 is finally ready and it is being assembled as we speak. Gotten a bunch of PCBs back from China that are going through final assembly and testing here in the United States, and I expect a bunch of them to be for sale in the Dreaming Robot store next Friday. It took a lot longer than anticipated to get this version ready. I had to work out a lot of edge case bugs, and I wanted to make sure that it was up to my quality standards before releasing to the public. So I apologize for all of you who've been waiting a long time for it, but I think the wait was well worth it. What I'm going to be going over this week are the hardware changes that I've made from version 4 to version 5 that I think make version 5 a lot better than version 4. And there's also a lot of software changes, but I don't have time to go over everything this week, so I'm going to be focusing on the hardware changes in this new version of the Camera Axe. So here's the PCB as it arrives to us from China. It's got just the surface mount components on it at this point, and they're really tiny. It's hard to tell, but there's actually over 50 components already on this board, and they're placed on there with robotic pick and place machines, so everything's really precise, and it's actually a cheap way to get this type of component onto the board. After this, we do the hand assembly of the rest of the components, so the board will look more like this in the United States, and we do all the testing here in the United States as well. So you've got this side with the screen that's been attached, a bunch of buttons, and then on this side we've got sort of the main microcontroller here, and now I'll just sort of go over some of the improvements that have happened from version 4 to version 5 of the Camera Axe. So the Camera Axe 5 no longer needs a special port to reprogram it. It uses a standard USB cable that's included with the Camera Axe 5. Reprogramming to the latest version of the software is actually a huge selling point because during the life of the Camera Axe, there's been many improvements, and now that the community has started to become more involved, the improvements are actually accelerating. I have big hopes for future software offering lots of new features. I'm not going over the software features in this episode. I'm staying focused on the hardware improvements, so we won't go over what those changes are, but I'm sure there'll be a future episode about that. Camera Axe also has this new lithium-ion battery that's included with it, and it's a 850 milliamp hour battery that provides about 20 to 60 hours of typical use. And the reason there's a big range there is because some of the sensors use more power, and actually turning off the backlight in software will save you a lot of power and make the battery life last a lot longer. Recharging is done via this USB cable, or the USB cable through this port. And if you ever decide you want to replace the battery with a bigger one, it's a pretty standard plug here and easy to just plug in a new larger battery. The sensor ports on the Camera Axe now allow 2 data lines per port, and this will be required by some new sensor designs. The first such sensor being the motor controller. This was done while keeping sensor ports backward compatible with all of the existing sensors for the Camera Axe. I also added input and output protection to these sensor ports, so people are less likely to accidentally damage the Camera Axe. The trigger lights over here on this side are now multicolored, and you can see the difference between triggering the shutter, triggering autofocus, or doing both. So there's a green, red, and orange for those 3 different combinations. The powering system, which is controlled by this chip here, is now much more efficient. This converter runs approximately 5 times more efficient than the previous version, so it uses 5 times less power than the old version, which is why such a small battery can provide power to the Camera Axe for so long. There's a new timing crystal for the Camera Axe. This gives it much more accurate and more precise timing, which is useful for all the different sensors and the intervalometer. Overall, I put a lot of product design into this to make it more durable, and a lot more testing was done on this version to try to get rid of some rare glitches that happened, and this is a large reason why it took so long to get this version ready for the public. And I expect the end result of this to be, this total rework, to be that fewer people have these, random issues that are causing them problems. The design here uses less expensive parts. So this version of the Camera Axe, while it has a lot more parts and is a lot more complicated, is actually cheaper to buy than version 4 in the store. It's not that much cheaper. It's $10 cheaper, but hey, for a much better product being $10 cheaper than the previous version, I think that's pretty cool. Another thing I did with the parts when designing this version was I made sure that I picked parts that were more easy to obtain. The previous version, I had a lot of problems with finding parts in stock to make additional batches, and because of that, there were frequently long periods of time where it was out of stock in the store because I just couldn't get the parts on the web to build more. Hopefully, on this version, I picked parts that were more generic and available from more suppliers, so I shouldn't have as big a problem sourcing parts for this version. So when I designed this, I also picked a bunch of surface mount components that I showed before, and this helps make assembly quicker and easier. And again, this will help supply more Camera Axes meet the higher demands that we've been seeing while keeping the prices low. I also wanted to point out that some of these surface mount parts just do not have through-hole equivalents. For example, this high efficiency boost converter that I used to power the board, it doesn't have any through-hole version components. There's also only surface mount versions of this lithium ion battery charging chip here that handles the charging of the battery, and there's only surface mount versions of this chip here that handles the efficient backlighting of the LCD and reduced power consumption from the LCD. This chip over here handles the programming through a USB port. That's why we don't need a special cable anymore. And again, that's only available in surface mount. So I just sort of wanted to explain that beyond the cost savings and easier assembly, there's just were requirements that forced us to go to a bunch of surface mount components. And I know that a few people out there have said, they really want kits, but it's not possible to do a kit with all of these really small surface mount components. And I sort of wanted to explain that, that's why there's no kit of this version. There is the Camera Axe Shield kit, and that's the version that if you want to build a kit, you should go and check out that. And that's been selling in the Camera Axe store for a while now. A lot of people have been using it and taking great photos with it. For anyone out there who wants to pre-order the Camera Axe, I'm sorry, I just don't do pre-orders. I get a lot of emails asking me for pre-orders, and it's just not something I'm comfortable with doing. I want to make sure that the product's in stock that you're ordering. So instead of pre-orders, what I do have is an email list that you can sign up for that will send you an email as soon as the Camera Axe is in stock, and you can go and purchase it at that time. I'll put a link in the show notes to where you can go and sign up for that email if you want. And thanks for watching.